I'm fine, and you? Great. So today, I thought we could talk about, from my book, They Were Not Slaves, that we could talk about the the um, the corporate entities, the banks, the insurance companies, the institutions such as the Church of England and the Bank of England, Barclays Bank, Lloyds of London, um, London Assurance, and more sort of modern companies like Aetna and JP Morgan, and who am I forgetting? Paris-based AXA, etc. And what do these companies and entities and institutions and others, there were shipping companies, there were insurance companies, there were banks then and now, whether directly involved or indirectly involved in the conspiracy against the rights of approximately 17 million undefended civilians from the African continent between 1619 and 1865 for a duration of 244 years approximately, who were attacked, who were trafficked across the Atlantic Ocean in a sort of work for your entire lifetime without pay scheme called the transatlantic slavery. And in order to sort of succeed in this particular enterprise or conspiracy, there were many, many players involved. There were the merchants, first of all. There were the de facto employers who purchased these human beings who had never indicated that they were for sale, even though they owned their own bodies by virtue just of the possessive pronoun, right? My body, your body belongs to me, right? So to sell it, I have to agree. There's no indication that any of these 17 million innocent undefended civilians ever agreed to be sold. But anyway, you have the merchants, you have the buyers and sellers, you had the shipping companies that physically trafficked these human beings across the Atlantic Ocean. You had the banks and insurance companies that underwrote all of these contracts, these shipping contracts and insurance contracts to facilitate this conspiracy. And then you had the government that aided and abetted all of these players in basically depriving 17 million undefended civilians who had done absolutely nothing wrong, as far as the evidence and records indicate, to have been treated in this manner, to have been deprived of all of their rights in this manner, to have been violated in the egregious ways in which they were violated for such a long time, to have been despeciated from their very membership in the human species, to have been criminalized, imprisoned on their work sites, and to have their children, for up to 17, 18, 19 generations of their children, likewise imprisoned just by virtue of being born of their loins. And so today I thought we could talk about a little bit anyway about the corporate entities, because I don't think we've ever really talked about that. We've always talked about the governments, and of course ultimately I think the responsibility for this lies with the governments. And I mean, and again, I say that respectfully because I understand that by pointing this out, and that by demanding some accountability from my government and other governments in the world, that I put myself into a position of being the heavy in this situation. And I mean, there's nothing I can do about that. I can't let that cause me to remain silent about this, because I feel that it's too important. It's almost outside of myself. I feel like I've been, tapped on the shoulders, and it's just what I have to do, whatever the consequences are. I mean, I'd much rather, frankly, stay in my little bubble and and cook my hamburgers and be happy. But, this has to be said, and I have to say it. So anyway, the so I've always focused on the governments, and I think ultimately the governments are the ones that I really look to for some accountability, because I need to respect my governments. I need to know that they are who I think they are, especially the government of the United States of America. Less so than the government and monarchy of England, because I don't really know that much about that country. I know that my ancestors and even I at some point was under sort of the British, not the British flag, but we were part of the British Commonwealth for such a long time. And so there is that sort of familiarity and affinity that I have for England and for the Queen and for all of those things. I mean, I'm very much influenced by British culture, and I love the idea of England, and the monarchy and Harry and, you know, the Queen and all of that kind of thing. But mostly I look to America. Why? I don't know. I mean, I'm a citizen of the United States, and I just think that the United States is the country perhaps most inclined to say, okay, okay, let's look at this, whereas others just will not care to look. I could be wrong, but that's just sort of my fantasy world. In my fantasy world, in my oblivion, that's sort of what I think. So I've always focused on the governments, and I still do and will. Until I am heard, I will continue to do that. But I also think there are the corporate entities, and those that I've called out before. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that any of these entities were involved, whether directly or indirectly, in this conspiracy against the rights of undefended civilians. But I am saying that, to the extent that they were or could have been, that perhaps, not perhaps, but that they would be implicated in some way if this were to come to a lawsuit situation. Um, if it can be proven that they were involved, or that companies they later acquired were involved, because my feeling is that if they later acquired companies like, for example, let's say JP Morgan or Aetna or Lloyds of London or AXA, or any of these companies, if it can be shown that they acquired companies that were involved in this conspiracy against the rights of so many innocent civilians, then yes, I do think that they would have a responsibility to do something about it, other than apologize and say, oh, we're so sorry, and let's just throw some cash at minority groups and call it a day. I don't think that cuts the muster. I think that, how much time do we have here? Okay. Um, I know I talk too much. I think that, all of these companies would have an obligation, both legal and moral obligation, to do more than say, oh, we're so sorry. I know that there were some companies like Lloyds of London that issued some kind of apology and promised to make contributions to minorities at large. But I don't think it's very respectful for companies to resolve this issue in that way. I mean, you don't go throwing money at African Americans for the Jewish Holocaust, right? You don't go throwing money at the Jews for the Japanese incarceration on sites during the Second World War, and you don't go throwing money at the Japanese for or the Hispanics or Native Americans or any of these people for the unlawful enslavement, the extrajudicial enslavement, the withholding of 100% of the wages of 17 million African citizens, African nationals. Um, you don't go throw money at other groups for that. You specifically address that to the group that it pertains to, because that's a way to show respect. That is real accountability, and that just shows that you get it, that there's some sensitivity to this, and that you're serious about it, and that your apology is sincere and your actions are sincere. I mean, so I wasn't very impressed with Lloyds of London who I think apologized last year and promised to make these contributions. I'm not impressed with it. I think that they need to be more focused about this. They need to be more sensitive. They need to be more specific about what they do. And other corporate entities and institutions such as the Church of England, the Church of England, what was the other one? The Church of England, the Bank of England, Barclays Bank, all these other companies need likewise to get on board and start to talk about specifically what they're going to do to repair and to restitute the relatives of these millions of workers that they so egregiously violated and harmed for 244 years. So yeah, that's where we are with that. Yes, of course. Yes. See you, I don't know, maybe weekend or next week, early next week.